you can get kind of like seduced by what's trending, let's say, by something that's, you know, and you can start to compare yourself to your contemporaries and start to change what you're doing. Look at the market, look at the contemporaries, but maybe take it with a pinch of salt. What's going to work for somebody else isn't necessarily going to work for you at all. And yeah, you have to be careful about what's trending, you know. People can see your real motivation. It's obvious to everybody around you, you know. If you're grifting, people can see it. It's obvious. Think about the work and what's best for the work, and maybe help some others along the way, you know.
All right. Just had a great conversation with Harvey Rayner. Harvey is an artist with over 25 years of experience, and he's one of the more well-known generative artists in our space. He's got an upcoming collection called Amplitudes of Canvas, which is dropping on ArtBlocks Studio in August of 2025. And this is the episode you want to listen to if you want to learn more about Harvey Rayner, his life experiences, how he became the generative artist that he is today, and just the inner workings of Harvey's mind. He's a very interesting guy. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Let me know what you think and enjoy. Before we jump in, none of this is financial advice. This is for entertainment and information purposes only. Please take everything with a grain of salt and do your own research. More information can be found in the podcast episode description below. All right, now let's get into it. I mean, thanks for making the time to come on, man. It's, this is, I guess, episode 2 for me, and I'm just kind of getting the ball rolling. So I'm honored to have you on as my second guest, Harvey, and the first actual artist, generative artist on the podcast. So, dude, thanks for coming on. And you want to kind of share what's going on right now on your end?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me first and foremost. Always a pleasure to chat. The audience should know that we're actually pretty good buddies, right?
Yeah,
I think we are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how the podcast goes.
We'll see how we are at the end of the show. Yeah, I work a lot, but I've been trying to I was just seeing there's some chalk on my hair from my climbing walls. Like I've been trying to mix things up, do some things to get me away from the computer, just so that I'm not in front of it for more than 12 hours a day. So
Crazy.
Yeah. So and the other thing is look, check it out.
No way.
Go to drum kit. So
that's awesome.
And I played a tiny bit when I was young, but I always wanted to play. And I thought, you know, fuck it. I mean, it costs nothing, secondhand, you know, they don't hold any value. And I thought, well, why not just get one? You know, I was kind of be embarrassed about getting one. But then I built that climbing wall last year, and it's like so fun. I think, why did I do this 20 years ago? You know, it's like, why not just do what you know, there's nothing wrong with having fun. It's young, I'm 50 now, right? So, you know, between the drums and the climbing, it's a good kind of like coordination exercise for my brain. The climbing keeps me fit. So the drums are tearing me away from my work at the moment, but I limit myself to an hour a day.
Okay. What, for drumming?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot, but I just do 20 minutes here and there, like 20 minutes when I get in the studio in the morning, and I do another 20 minutes before I leave, and then another one in the day sometime. But yeah, but it's freaking
You set
awesome.
the timer and then you just start smashing
No,
shit?
I don't set timer. I'm just guessing. I'm probably sitting there for 3 hours and I don't even know it. But
Probably.
yeah, it's good to sort of like start something from scratch and be a complete novice.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've been thinking about this a lot because, like, with the drums, right? Obviously, I'm a complete beginner, right? I've been playing for like 2 weeks now, but I have so much confidence. Like, I listen to something and think, yeah, I'll be able to do that in a couple of years or whatever. I have this sort of naive kind of like view of what drumming is. And within generative, like the thing I'm probably, you know, reasonably good at, like generative art, I doubt myself all the time because I know the depth of you know, I know the depth of because I've been doing it for so long. It's a vaster space of possibilities, and it's just so much more complex and rich. And, you know, I guess with things like drumming, like this because I don't know, I'm not particularly musical, I don't know the depth of it. So it's easy for me to sort of like simplistically kind of like think, oh, it's nothing, I can do that. It's almost like you hear about scientists, right? The more they kind of like get deeply into a subject, the more they know they don't know, if you know what I mean. And I think Hokusai said something like in his 90s, he's like said something like, I feel like I can draw a little bit, or something like that. Probably a little bit more poetic than that, but yeah. So yeah, I've been working on Amplitudes of Canvas for a long time now. It seems, but it's only actually since May. I was working on a bunch of other projects over the winter, but I started that in May, and now it's ready to release. It's all up on the ArtBlocks back end, and I'm ready to pull the trigger. But I've got to work around. Well, I mean, with Studio, one of the nice things about Studio, you can just do what you want when you want to do it. But just want to make sure it ties in with it. I don't want to sort of do anything that conflicts with anything they've got planned. So there's some things coming up. Be nice to freaking finally release something, you know. I've been making so much work. If you go to my website and see my work in progress page, there's just a ton of projects there, just probably thousands of hours of work, and I haven't released anything since September.
Yeah, and I really do recommend that anybody who's listening to actually go and check out your website, because it does cover the works in progress. It covers all of the projects that a lot of people are probably familiar with, but also it shows the works that you did from years ago. Like, I don't know how many years ago, like 10 plus years ago, right? That you, I think, consider to
25
be,
years ago.
yeah,
Yeah,
I know that's when you,
yeah.
so is that when
There's,
you
there is stuff
actually,
there. Yeah, well, there's kind of, I always sort of like would take old work and then work on it again and work. So it's hard to say when it was made because it's just an ongoing thing. But there are certainly like motifs in there that started, began when I was in, even at art school when I was, like 20 years old, 30 years ago. But there's a lot of work which I haven't put on there yet. A lot of old work which I've been meaning to sit down and try to kind of like contextualize it a bit and tell explain more about that kind of early process, which was quite different to how I worked. The sort of things I was trying to explore, and because I never had to do that because I never had an audience back then, I didn't have to explain it to anybody.
I think you should go as far back as some of the early drawings that you showed me
So
when I was at your place.
yeah, you've seen stuff that nobody else has ever seen, including some people in my family probably. Yeah.
Holy crap. I think that some of these really early drawings that you've done, it was fascinating for me to see that, because it really does show not only an interest in visual art, but also a real inherent skill set, like like you were really good, like very early. Like, you showed me works where you were age 9, 10, maybe even earlier, that were really impressive to me. Like, I don't even think that I could draw that well now. So I think that that could be worth sharing more. I think that there would be a lot of people that might actually find that very interesting. And it also helps to understand your kind of like your origin story a little bit as an artist, and to see that progression is really fascinating. So it's really cool.
I would, yeah, I probably will. Guess I've hesitated in the past just because I don't want to, like, some of those, obviously, when I was, let's say, a teenager and stuff, yeah, I was competent. It was obvious to see that I had some skill, right? So I don't want to like put that in the world and say, look, this is a valid, this shows you that I can draw, like, because, actually, it's funny. I actually feel like, people say, well, you don't have to draw to be an artist. And I actually agree with them. I think the skill really is actually, well, there's many skills, but one of the main ones is just being able to look, being able to look and when sort of suspend your thinking. So you kind of like really look with an open mind and then respond to that, from your intuition and stuff. So, drawing a picture of, a picture that looks like a photograph is a type of just looking, because just being able to look and see compared tones and stuff like that. I mean, to be honest, like I haven't really drawn much for 20 years, so I don't even know if I can do it again. I probably could pick it up pretty quickly, but I don't like because all the rock climbing I've done in my life, my fingers are like different. They're thick, or like cartilage is all built up in them, and they're super like stiff. And so, like holding a pencil now, I feel like a
You
bit
can
of a
only type
yeah,
your,
right.
yeah,
Well,
okay. That's
I don't
hilarious.
feel like I have the same finesse, but I think it would come back because again, it's not about like the technical craftsmanship of drawing. It's just one aspect of art. But what I think that early work does show is that I had an interest and to some degree an instinct for like composition and dynamics and an interest in just making something that felt like visually powerful on an abstract, just in a purely abstract terms. And um, but once I went to art school and, I went to kind of a classical school and it was one of the last remaining ones. We did lots of live drawing stuff, but I kind of like just, when I won a scholarship and I was doing really well, but I just didn't want nothing to do with it after about a few months. So I started getting into geometry and math and I just abandoned it all right there and then and quit the art school. But because it just didn't seem like through that path of using that type like painting and drawing, and I just didn't feel like I was going to be able to say anything original. I actually now haven't gone back like recently. I've spent a lot of time looking at contemporary art again. I mean, I could do it every 5 years or so. But now I actually appreciate that there are painters for sure making making highly unique and original work. But I couldn't personally, I couldn't see a way to do it. And it wasn't computers back then, but looking back, it's a similar, like the need to have the geometry and the art come from the mathematics and stuff is the same thing that that kind of I find in the generative stuff now, code-based stuff. I'm trying not to use that word anymore.
We're going to have to get some hats made this year in Marfa that just say code-based on the hat instead of generative, I think.
Right.
I should have worn my generative hat for this.
Code-based human.
Hey, we are code-based, genetic code.
Right. In a sense, yeah. DNA
it's all generative.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, because this is actually a bit of a gap for me in my understanding of your journey a little bit. So when you decided to leave art school and you wanted to explore like geometry and mathematics kind of based artworks, what was that transition exactly? Like, were you hoping to then, I guess, release your works and be able to sell it with any galleries or anything like that? Was this like physical works? Was this digital? Like, what was that actual transition where you decided, you know what, I'm going to leave art school and I'm going to kind of do my own thing?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't anything to do with a career. Although, of course, I was a young artist. I wanted to find a way to get my stuff into the world, but I didn't know anything about the art world. They hadn't taught us anything about it at that point. I was completely naive. I don't know if I wasn't even really thinking about approaching galleries. I just wanted to explore this new avenue that I kind of stumbled on, really. It started with just one piece, right? So I had an art teacher there who I really respected. I really sort of like, I have a lot of fond memories of him. And I think he was a really amazing artist. He's an unknown. His name's Eric Mulvey, but if you look him up, there's one of his paintings I found online, but he's like, I could tell the way he talked about art that he was good, right? And he stood, for me, he stood head and shoulders above all the other tutors there. But he was he was an alcoholic, and he didn't know how to play this, he didn't want to play the system either. He was like he lived like this true kind of like crazy artist life. So one of the things he was really passionate about Cezanne, Paul Cezanne, and I am too now. But so this is going to be a bit of a. But so he was telling us about he was telling in the pub when we were sitting there drinking, and we were talking about how Paul Cezanne used this kind of like modulation of warm and cool colors and tone to kind of create what he called like ovoid form, like try to create this representation of physical form on a flat canvas. So, you've got this, the basic idea is the warm colors kind of come forward, the cool colors go back, and through modulating these things and kind of creating these kind of like these ovoid kind of containers, he creates this kind of like, so it's like a way to represent mass on a flat surface. And that really fascinated me because it was so formal, and I was disinterested in formality. So I went away and like used geometry to kind of to create some like experiments, sort of like where I could sort of measure things and compare. And I created this kind of thing with geometry but it was more for just like, I wasn't thinking about using geometry as the fabric of my artwork at that point or anything. It was just a way to sort of like test the idea and like maybe in a more scientific controlled way. And but the result really sort of like touched me. It seemed something like it was was sort of, I don't know, it sort of like touched something really sort of like deep inside of me, something that was beyond sort of like emotion. On it was just sort of like, and that just sort of piqued my interest. So I just sort of like followed that. And after a few weeks of just playing with it, I'm like, I can't do this in this art school. It's all about, learning classical stuff. And well, I know it wasn't all about that, but it just, I, I would go in and I wouldn't really be able to concentrate in a room full of like, there's 12 people in the studio, and I just want to talk and piss around. But whereas at home, I could work all day long, it would just be like this. I would just want to sit down and chat. I'm too social, but I can work really well by myself. So I decided I would just, so I wasn't worried about I mean, if I had been a bit more sort of like savvy about my career, I would have stayed, because it definitely would have been, it's a good art school. The art shows, that is kind of like a springboard to getting into the kind of like the gallery scene. But again, I don't know if I could have done that with the work I was doing. I mean, I did used to take it to a few galleries, and they're like, I don't know what this is. I mean, which is funny, right? Because you always assume that art is always open to everything, but art is always in every age. You look at art in every age, it has a distinct kind of like look and feel, and it's the same now today. It's the same in this space. It's the same everywhere, and people get used to seeing a certain thing, and they would look at it and think, well, I don't know what this is. I've never seen it before, but I don't think it's art because it doesn't look like art. So after a few years of getting totally rejected from that, but this was prior to computers, so I was just drawing all this stuff with a compass and rule, and I was just working in black and white, just actually 5 tones for about 3 years, just a black, white, and mid grey, and a grey in between those. And so it was super pared down, but it grew in complexity. So, and then this was in 2000, and no, this is 1996 or something, 1997. I was just, what I did was I just took out a student loan, and I just lived in like this really cheap basement room for 2 years, just paying for my rent from the student loan, not knowing how I was going to pay it back. Yeah. So, just
Crazy.
exploring this freaking thing, and I was so into it. I was so into this thing. It was like a piece I was working towards, this like sculptural piece, and I was so invested in it. Like I couldn't see my life beyond the end of it. So I actually thought for a while. I mean, I was getting pretty crazy back then, but I thought I'd probably die once I finished. I thought that would be the end of my life, because I was so just that's all I lived and I thought about. And so it was, yeah, but that I didn't, yeah, I was dumpster diving to find food, and just living in this kind of like squalor. It was almost like a squat, really. But I had my desk, and I had it was all paper and pencil, so it didn't really cost anything to make. I filled all these big sketchbooks. Unfortunately, I burned a lot of them.
Burned, like physically burned them,
Yeah,
eh?
yeah, I did actually. Yeah, just before I moved here, but I had stuff. I thought, well, I went through them and pulled out pages which I thought were kind of like significant, and then I just burned everything. But really, I should have held on to some. Should have just kept it. I mean, it didn't take up that much room. So another significant thing happened during that time. I was kind of, well, backtrack a little bit. Before I went to art school, I would say is that like I didn't. I think I've mentioned this in the podcast, but I didn't really learn to read until I was 18, because I was, whether I'm dyslexic, I don't know, but I was so sort of like into making things with Lego and drawing and stuff. I just never wanted to read. And so probably I just did, but I probably am kind of, I mean, I still mix up letters and stuff. So like, but, so, but I think that the effect of that was that I never really got into like ideas. I was kind of like, there was a part of me which is quite simple, and which was a good thing. It kept me kind of like naive, and kind of not naive and innocent with my movement paper. And I enjoyed my childhood. I had a really good childhood. I had good parents, and had good friends and stuff. So, but it just kept me in this sort of like creative space of, without kind of getting intellectual about stuff. But then just before I went to art school, I decided, okay, I've got to learn to read. I mean, I could read, but it was like a 12-year-old, super slow. So I started reading books. And I started reading, the first book I read was Van Gogh's biography. Then I read The Agony and the Ecstasy, the story of Michelangelo stuff. And then I just sort of moved on to, like, I was reading Nietzsche. I think, like, Das Buch Zarathustra was like the third book I ever read. And I just kind of philosophy, and I just went big time in my head, and I lost the plot. So I was just thinking. And then, of course, I was in art school, and it was very sort of intellectual, and I'd get into debate. I debate a lot, and but it has had the effect that I was, I got totally out of balance and out of whack, and I just got grandiose and arrogant and in my head, and miserable. Pretty much. So I was living in this bedsit, and I had a few friends from art school, but I spent most of the time just in solitude, just getting lost in my own thoughts. I don't really like this daily cycle, and I'd be some in static state in the morning. And I think I got some big idea in my work, and then I'd work through it and realize it was just nothing, and I'd fall into a depression in the afternoon. It's like a daily cycle. But then this art teacher who I really admired. I kept in contact with him. I'd still go out with him, and we drink together. I didn't really I only drank when I was with him. I drank with him because that's what he did, and I'd get destroyed. But we'd talk about art and stuff. But he was really into Buddhism. Although looking back, I don't know how much of a practice he had because his life was a mess. And, well, not that Buddhism's going to necessarily sort that out for you, but like,
Might help.
yeah, it might help. So anyway, and so I understood. Well, I thought I understood, like Buddhism intellectually quite well, but I knew there was part of me which was like, to really understand this, I have to practice it. I have to meditate. So I sort of resisted it for about a year, and then I was just like, I remember I was sitting in the park one day, and this dog came up to me. I was sitting there, and I sort of like just feeling miserable, thinking I haven't laughed in like 6 months. And this dog just came up in my face and sort of sniffed me, and I just felt a connection to it, and I remembered what it was like to love something. It was that bad. It was like, and I thought something in me just like I knew how all the stuff I'd read about meditating stuff, that all just sort of like made sense all of a sudden. So I started practicing like a lot. Like, I read this book called The Three Pillars of Zen, which actually had a effect later on in my life. We'll go into that later. But I read that book from cover to cover, like in a day, just thinking, oh, I have to do this. And I meditated that day for 3 hours, and I did it every day for 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours every day for the next 5 years or so. And that should get me out of my head. That's what it would take. That's what it took. I would say after about a year, I was actually starting to feel like I could actually meet people and not get into a debate with them. I was so
Oh, yeah.
argumentative, and like, I don't know. Yeah, I would just end up fighting with people all the time. Not physically, but just like, especially if I went to the art school. But no, then after a year, after sort of like doing all the sitting and stuff, which was horrible. I mean, it's really struggle. It was a huge struggle, but I just felt like I had to do that. Otherwise, I'd go insane. Looking back, I think, so those people like my family stuff were a little bit worried about me but it did get me out of my head. Well, what it did was like show me that what ideas were maybe like that they weren't everything. They were just this kind of like froth on, this foam on the surface of life, and it kind of gave me some perspective. So that was big. That time in that bedsit making the art, and that the first sort of like foundations of the art, and then sort of investigated for like the next 15 years and getting into like Zen Buddhism and stuff was it really sort of like set the next 20 years up.
So that was because how long ago was that?
30 plus years. Let's just work this out. So I went to art school when I was 19, and then I was 2 years in London going through this. Yeah, about 21, 22, I then decided, okay, I'm gonna go to Rochester, New York, where this guy who wrote this book, The Three Pillars of Zen, teaches. not knowing that he was a really old man dying of Parkinson's, but I decided I'd go there and find him. So I sold the few things I had. I mean, I lived basically with I had a blanket I slept on and a desk I worked on, and that was about like I had some paintings and stuff, so I sold some of them, gave everything else away. Enough to get an airline ticket, and I flew to Toronto and hitchhiked to Rochester with no money and turned up there, and they're like, you've got to do this workshop. You can't just turn up here. And I always had all these ideals. I read all these stories about, Zen monks turning up at masters' houses and cutting their hands off and like showing,
Thank God you didn't do that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have done, but yeah. So I just thought, these people are just trying to make money, because I looked in the pamphlet, it said it was $60 for a workshop. I thought, I can't. I don't want nothing to do with these people. I carried this, but I spent 2 weeks like sleeping under bridges by then, and I found a way to find food and stuff, dumpster diving. And I thought, well, I can't discontinue, because I quite like living like this. So I carried on for 6 months, and I hitchhiked around America. I'm like going to freight trains and just not really living with homeless people, because they're usually, you could be careful. They're not there through choice, and they're often, crazy or just out of prison, and there's a lot of drug abuse and stuff. So so I would spend time with homeless people, but I would always keep a distance, because they see somebody who's kind of got it together, who can travel and is self-sufficient and can find food, and they think, oh my God, this is my path out of the madness. So they want to come with you everywhere and stuff and get you into trouble. So yeah, I've done that, and all the time, no money, just sleeping rough, whatever. I had a little sketchbook with me, and I started, because I still had this creative impulse, and so I started writing poetry. It's the only time really I've written poetry, and I do little doodles and drawings. But yeah, it's the only time really I didn't have what you call like a serious art practice. I was obviously, I couldn't really if I was sleeping on the streets. So yeah, I just sort of like kept meditating every morning and every evening, just wherever I slept, which was hard, really hard. But because I did that, because I like had that disciplined structure in my life, and just got through doing that every day, like 2 hours in the morning maybe, and then another 2 at night. Sometimes I'd do it an hour in the afternoon. Everything else actually seemed fairly easy, like the discomfort of sleeping rough and getting eaten by mosquitoes didn't seem like a big deal. Eating shit, eating shit, well, not shit, but like eating, people's leftover food just didn't, after a while, just like seemed fine. I actually put on weight for the first time in my life.
Yeah, that's crazy that
Yeah.
is a true
Well, it's
story.
junk. You're just eating junk all the time, because and in the sun and heat, funny enough, the only thing you find in the trash that's edible, which was counterintuitive, is actually like a McDonald's burger or something. They keep for a few days. They just sit in the dumpster and kind of continue to cook, basically. So I was just eating all this kind of crappy processed meat. Taco Bell would be my preference,
Taco Bell.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
There's places they throw, every night they'll throw all the stuff away they don't sell and put it in a big bin bag. You just got to, climb into find that bag, and you're set up for a day or so. And at the end of that trip, I end up getting picked up the road from where I live now, by a friend. Well, he's a friend now, obviously. And through him, the day after I met him, he introduced me to Laura, my wife. We sort of fell in love and conceived a child pretty quickly, like a month later.
You work fast.
Yeah, it was weird. I never wanted a wife and kids. For some reason, it seemed like a really good idea right then. And I thought, it just seemed like the right thing I knew it was going to happen. I knew I was going to meet my wife before I met her. I really did. I had this intuition that I would, and that happened. And we moved back to England, and we moved back here for a bit, and then we moved back there, and then we brought up the kids in England. So I went from being a Zen bum vagrant, to a married man with 2 kids overnight. It was a hard adjustment, but it's worked out okay. We're still all together.
During that time, I guess you were exploring, I guess, different avenues to sustain yourself while also then creating art, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So as soon as I got off the streets, I was it's picked up back where I started, with the geometry thing. And yeah, I mean, I worked a bunch of crappy job, just post office night shift, taxi driving, just whatever. But I'd always do the bare minimum. It's a social welfare system in England, so you don't have to. I was always like, well, I don't have to work that much because the state will bring my wages up to a certain livable amount. And so I was always trying to give myself a maximum amount of time to work on my art. Obviously, I had to, brought up the kids as well because Lauren tended to work more than me back in those days. So I used to be like the mum and I'd do the artwork while, the baby was asleep or whatever. So back then, it wasn't. We were just doing what we could, what we needed to. But later on, yeah, what did we do? I mean, Lauren was a florist for a while, and she had a plant nursery business, and then that got me into building experimental greenhouses. I spent a few years sort of like really going deep into that, and I built a liquid bubble insulated greenhouse in my back garden, which was the first of its kind in Europe. I teamed up with a local university to fill it full of sensors, and we sort of like try to do some good science. But it turned out we needed a control. I needed to build another one, to get sort of like some accurate comparison. So, and I'm not going to do that because it took me like half a year to build it. So that was, and then I got into that technology in a big way. And I kind of like, it was another period, well, the other period where I did stop making art, but I started to think, well, I'm making all this fucking art all the time and nobody's seeing it. I don't feel like I'm really contributing anything to the world, right? It was back when it was like right at the start of that kind of green movement. And I thought, well, maybe I can, have an impact and designing these sort of like eco greenhouses that self-insulate. It's a big problem, there's a lot of big greenhouses in the world and we're burning a lot of gas to keep warm at night or cool and when it gets too hot. And it's a problem that we still haven't solved. So I figured, well, this seems like a good idea. It wasn't my idea. It was that idea that's actually been floating around for actually a few decades. You could use liquid bubble foam to insulate, which you can, but there wasn't very few like good attempts at making it work. So it worked. I got some videos online of the project and stuff, and we get lots in there. And I really got into that, and I got into sort of working with a company that grew tomatoes in England. They were the biggest tomato growers in England at the time, and they had me work on their 500. We had a 500 square meter sort of like test greenhouse, which I helped to build the bubble generators for that. So that was kind of like it was just an odd gig, And then I was also doing web design stuff at the time. So that was another. And then I got into I was making sort of like, I got into SVG in a big way, right back in the early days, when SVG was, you needed a plugin on Internet Explorer to make it work. But so I was like an SVG specialist and I made sort of like user interfaces for companies that wanted custom patterns on their goods.
This is the origins of pattern.co, right?
That's why I would buy any domain name with the word pattern in at that point. So I picked up that one right when .co's came out. So because I was into patterns, I had this site called Pattern Cooler. I actually recently lost a domain name because I forgot about it. But so that was like an editor suite for patterns and stuff, and all that stuff. As you like, add a donate button on there, and it actually started to make a small income. I was surprised, but people really liked it, and a lot of schools used it, and for their kids, to do projects and stuff. So that was a kind of the first time I'd actually made money from like a creative thing, other than the greenhouses. And then around that time, I was still doing a lot of Zen. I was still doing a lot of meditation. I started going away on retreats and doing all these long retreats, and I'd get terrible. I mean, everybody gets pain in their legs and stuff. Zen is kind of a little bit brutal like that. And I used to get all butt pain and my legs would go numb. And so I just decided there's got to be a better solution to the cushions that we use. And so I designed this cushion. Lauren helped, Lauren sewed it and we prototyped a whole bunch. So it was just for me at that point, we probably made like 20 different versions of it until I got something that really worked well for me. And I solved all these problems I had. And then we thought, well, maybe we'll just put some on Etsy and see if they sell. And they did. And, that was grew into this business called Moonleap, bread and butter for a long time. But when that all happened just before we moved back to the States 13 years ago. So yeah, we had a nice little business there. We still got it. We're not selling them at the moment just because we ran out of spelt.
We have one here, and yeah, my girlfriend, she loves it. She
Cool.
uses it. Yeah.
Oh,
So
cool. I didn't know she had one. Right. All this time I'm making art. Like, it's usually the first thing I would do in the morning. I'd usually do that for an hour, then I'd meditate, and then I would I'd just do it all my spare time because it's, and I'd probably done an average, like, it was probably like I still done it like a full week, 40-hour week, just making art. It's just because it's like, that's always what I had to do. It's never really been like something that drains me. It's always something I would do for fun. So it's something I can do when I'm tired. I could, if I had to go and do a day's work somewhere, I could come back and do it even if I was exhausted because it's just, and I find it, energizing. I wasn't using a computer until it was around the year 2000. I think Lauren bought a computer and I'm like, I don't want nothing to do with this. I just didn't have a feel for it. And after about a year, I finally got an email address and I started to play around with it a little on the internet. And I started scanning some of my drawings in and playing with. I was doing it all, like, I wasn't using vector software and stuff, which would have been ideal. I was just doing it all back to just using it in odd ways. But then eventually I got Corel Draw, which is like Illustrator vector based. And I realized I could use, there was an equivalent of a compass rule. I could use it like that in this software. And I thought, oh, this is great. Because I was getting to the point where what my work was getting so complex, it would take me weeks to paint it because it was also it wasn't the right way to make it because it was all sort of like growing exponentially every year in complexity because I would use this sort of modular system. So the computer made a lot of sense, and once I got into it, it was like that's all I did, and I slowly learned to do a little coding to make my own websites. Probably like 2005, I was, and then I got into making software to kind of like help with the process. But generative art was like code-based art probably didn't start until like 2000. I don't know. But I think I said like 12 years ago, 13 years ago, a bit longer than that. I don't know. But it was like, I didn't know anyone calling it generative art back then. Wasn't really cool. I mean, some of the experiments I worked on for a long time, I didn't even really think of as art. I mean, I was still making art at the time, but some of them were just like ways I would build these tools to explore these sort of like geometric objects, like quasi crystals and things like this. It was just more to like satisfy my like. It was like an investigation. It was kind of exciting because it wasn't something. It wasn't art. It wasn't science. It wasn't mathematics. It was just this weird nondescript field that I was just intuitively sort of feeling my way into, and it felt. Yeah, there's still a lot of work there that I want to revisit at some point because I mean, I don't know if it'll ever have any application or anything, but it still feels really fascinating to me. But I wasn't really sharing this stuff. It was just my own weird world. But I really sort of built my foundation of coding back then, doing that stuff.
And I mean, I've seen some of, you've shown me some of your code today, and it's like I just can't even
Well, you were using
imagine
spreadsheets only a couple of years ago to make.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. To see some of the work that you've done, like with Fontana, because you had showed me a little bit of the behind the scenes code. It's hard for me to even imagine like how you could put something like that together. Not to mention ChatFUKR and everything else, right?
That's yeah. ChatFUKR and Quasi Dragon Studies are probably the most technically difficult things I've done, but yeah. But I will say I don't think that I think there are like Peter Pesman and stuff. I mean, they are. I think they've lived and breathed code since they were probably teenagers, and they have a different sort of proficiency to what I do. I'm just more of a specialist. I'm good at a certain thing, but it's quite a narrow thing. I've always felt I was a slow learner. but I just persistent. So I can do, I feel complete control of what the little area of coding I do, but I don't want to say there's a lot of people out there I look at. Well, I mean, I can read their code, obviously, but like I think, well, this shows that you've got much more experience in a much wider area of coding than I do.
So then from the point at which you started to then explore generative art, at first you weren't really sharing these works with anyone, right?
I would try to. I mean, I would post them on Facebook. I didn't. I hadn't. I can't remember when my ex. When does it say? It probably says on my ex account when I joined. Joined 2020. There you are.
From my understanding is that there was kind of this community that were kind of sharing generative artworks. I think Tyler Hobbs and
Right.
Ben Kovac, and yes, they were kind of like exploring generative art in parallel to when you were doing it as well, right? But you weren't really connected with that community at this point,
No, I
right?
didn't know anything about it. Yeah, the only person I knew of was, what's his name? Levitate.net was his name. Anyway, yeah, so he had some really beautiful work. And yeah, I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I never really thought that there would be a way to ever monetize or anything. I just wasn't, yeah, I would share things on Facebook, like, get 20 views or whatever. Yeah, I just didn't know how to really, and I don't know if I was, I just wasn't really trying that hard to share it in the world. Like I said, I'd given up trying to be a professional artist in my 20s. I was still dedicated to making art and I still loved doing it, but I was actually quite happy just doing it as a serious hobby. I mean, it was more than a hobby. It was still my life, but I was happy doing it that way. I could do what I wanted. I didn't have to prove it to anybody. And I still, to this day, I still think there's certain merit in and making that decision, just being, because it's tough to. I mean, I've obviously been lucky that I got in the NFT space at the right, at a good time. Not as early as some, obviously, but I got in early enough that I could kind of like cement my career and actually become a professional. But I have a lot of friends who are professional. Well, they're not professionals. They just made art for 40 years and they can't find a way to sell it. And they still keep trying. I'm thinking, well, just at some point, if you've been doing this for you, maybe just accept that you're not going to, and then just enjoy it. You enjoy it more. You'll just relieve the pressure from, because it's so disheartening to kind of like keep getting rejected. And at some point, just I think at some point in my early 20s, it was too painful for me to keep trying to shift this stuff and get people to to appreciate it. So I never really wanted to have it. I had an exhibition locally once. Just somebody sort of like twisted my arm, but I didn't really want to do it because. So, and I was enjoying my life, I was enjoying the things I was doing to earn money. So, fuck it.
And, and then NFTs happened, and then
And then
that all went to shit.
all went to shit. Yeah. I was aware of NFTs for probably since, well, I was aware of crypto and NFTs since probably like 2016, and I did a little day trading for a while. I got kind of like, oh, maybe this is the way that I can actually just, because I was always looking for odd ways to make extra, to make money, which involved me working less so I could spend more time making art. But that was during the first big bull run, and I joined that kind of like as everything was going up. So I thought, of course, I was a genius, and I thought, oh, I got this down. I'm making all this, money, but of course, it all crashed, and I lost it all. I think I broke even in the end, but and I thought, oh, this just feels horrible. So I got out of that because just losing the money just felt disgusting. So, and so I was aware of crypto. I'd heard of NFTs. I didn't really, the ones I'd seen didn't feel like anything to do with art to me. So I didn't really see, and I hadn't heard of anything to do with generative. But soon, like I don't know what podcast it was, but there was a podcast with Eric, and he was talking about ArtBlocks and what they were doing there. And I thought, this is it. This is this is what I've been waiting for. This is a home. Finally, it felt like as a home for the thing that I'm doing, this weird shit that I'm doing. there's a home for it, and there's also a market for it. Which, as I learned more, I was like, oh shit, okay, if I get on ArtBlocks, I'm made. Well, which wasn't really. Funnily enough, I joined in 2021, but I just faffed around my project for like 6 months before I was ready to drop it. So if I'd been a little quicker, I would have gotten on, been on early. But yeah, that was Photon's dream. But I was making generative art, and I built a lot of that project before I'd heard of ArtBlocks, but I hadn't built it in a way that sort of was long form, and that was a totally different thing to get my head around. I wasn't really using randomness, and it wasn't a long form collections. It's the steep learning curve to kind of like get your head around what that really means. I would say I'm still learning.
So you dropped Photon's Dream, and all of a sudden you had, I guess, like an audience or a community
Mm.
of people that then learned about who you are as an artist. And then there was a mechanism for them to be able to purchase your works. So how did that change? Because up until this point, it seems like, a lot of the work that you were doing was there was a very small amount of people, like almost in isolation for years, and then a small group of people that might have been seeing the work that you were doing. And then all of a sudden, you're riding this wave of interest in the NFT space and this movement that ArtBlocks was really kind of pioneering, in the space. And in 2021, I know from experience from being there that there was a huge amount of excitement and fascination with creating and also buying art, I guess. So what was that like for you at that point? Because you said everything changed, right? So
Well, yeah, I mean, everything changed in the sense that as soon as I got, I put together an application for ArtBlocks, and as soon as I got, an email to say, I've been accepted, I just dropped everything I was doing. Like I was renovating houses 3 years before, and I was also building an app company that I spent about 14 months on that, and I went nowhere. So I was building, I was doing construction on some properties that we own and stuff, but I literally, as soon as I got accepted, I just dropped my tools, and they were on the ground for like 2 years. I didn't even move them. I thought I have to give this 100%. I may not get this chance again. And did enough. I'd heard enough about art blocks to like, the mindset was that okay, if you get accepted by art blocks, you're a millionaire, right? You're made for the rest of your life financially, which wasn't true in 2022. I mean, it wasn't necessarily true in 2021 for everyone either. But there was this mindset, and there wasn't a lot of kind of like reality checks for the artists. They were kind of like everybody's kind of believed it, like this golden ticket, and like unless you stopped and actually look at what was selling and what the trends were, and what the reality was, you wouldn't know. I was just based on kind of like hype in the little community of like people who were making the art and stuff, and you'd hear about certain sales and stuff, and you think, oh, I'm good now. I'm set. So back then, I think a lot of us had unrealistic expectations, including myself. And so actually, it didn't change. Like Photon's Dream was actually it felt at the time like a huge disaster. It felt like it was actually like maybe I've shared this story in public before, but like it was actually the most difficult period of my life, with a hands down, like once it dropped, because I thought finally after 25 years, here I am, I'm ready for this. I've got a decent project on, and it sold, but very, very, very slow. It didn't sell out like everything else at the time, like the first go was that it wasn't curated. I mean, that was just like crushed me, like, and some of the feedback was horrible. Somebody said it was like having eye damage or something. I can't remember. Like I thought, that's really, it was like having an eye injury. I
savage.
thought, God, that's a bit much. And so this just really, really hurt me. And a friend of mine did get curated, and we were working together on our projects, and we were kind of helping each other through the process. And they got curated, and I didn't. And I'm like, fuck.
Who was
So
that,
anyway,
if you don't mind me asking?
it was Melissa. So yeah, and she like I think she dropped hers just before mine or something, or just no, I think it was just after. It made it worse because she'd done really well. It was really well received, and and I if so, Photon Stream did sell, but when it actually dropped minute, the gas was like 60, so like it was high. It sort of slowed things down. Of course, when things lose momentum, but it kept selling, and it kept selling, and it was like 3 weeks. And but the first week, I was just like, "Fuck, I'm dead." I was just like, "Oh, it's not going to sell out. I'm probably going to come away with making like 20 grand or something," which of course is amazing when you think about it, right? But when you think, "Oh, I'm going to be able to retire," and I felt such a loser. I felt like I'd let my family down because we were all excited, and yeah, I was just gutted. But the thing is, in my mind. I felt like the people who, in my mind, the people who buying this stuff were somehow all knowledgeable about art, right? And that they were somehow, they were basically saying, actually, you're no good, And I believed because I built everything up so much, and I thought, well, I remember that like in the afternoon when it dropped and it just like, it sold like 20 or whatever and it just stopped. I just was so gutted. And I went outside and I thought, am I like that person who goes on X Factor and thinks they're good at singing and everybody knows they're not? Yeah, I was just really angry with myself because I'd never been, I'd never had. I mean, it's all vanity and everything, but I always share this story because I think a lot of us maybe do go through this at some point. We all get it at some point. I was lucky, and I started my career with this. In hindsight, this is the best way to start because you don't take anything for granted after. So, but so what I did after about a week of feeling sorry for myself, and actually is getting as close to depression as I've ever been in my life, because I'm usually, I don't get down like that, not since not since I went to art school, all those years ago. But that was different. That was more like neurosis, and that wasn't really depression. But I just felt so sorry for myself. And I thought, no, okay, let's hustle. Let's get this. So I started to do things like if you buy two today, I'll throw in this extra thing called this X-ray. So I built this whole collection quickly, which was like a way of looking into the photon stream. And you see this extra thing you get or print, and slowly, they started to move. And then, I mean, people, I think it would have moved and sold it anyway because people, there was a group of people who really did like it, and then, of course, once it gets to like, 300 of the 400, it sells out in an instant because that's just how ArtBlocks was back then. It was Sunday morning and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit. And then, so I'm like, okay, good. I've got like, I think I made like 40 or $50,000, which is incredible, and I felt like shit. Yeah, I now I can commit because all this time I was thinking I'm not going to be able to, I can't work on this full time if I'm just going to come away with, I just felt like my dream had been snatched away from me. I can't work on this full time. I've got to support, I got to bring money into the house. I can't just goof off for a year at a time and make 20 grand a year or whatever. So, and then, but the thing is that like the huge thing that hit me during this process of giving these things away, it felt really nice to give things away to collectors. That lifted my spirits. But then in the process of giving things away, I started looking at their wallets. And then I saw that they were just full of freaking cartoons and PFPs. I'm like, shit, these people in my mind were like the art establishment. Like, and here they are. They don't know anything about art. They don't give a shit. Well, some of them, to be fair, some of them maybe were passionate, right? But I'm like, oh, none of this matters. This is just a game. And then something clicked in me and like, oh, I've got to play the game. And, if I'm going to be successful at this, yeah, sure, make your best art, but also get to understand the game of selling it, understand your audience, understand the market. And I took a breath and I thought, okay, let's look at ArtBlocks. Let's look at what actually sold, over what's been successful. And I looked at anti-cyclones and I looked at like, obviously Fidenza. But I saw this kind of like people were doing this kind of, and Emily's project, and they're beautiful projects, there's no doubt about it. And I could see that, there was this thing where people were kind of, sort of like creating things that look more like traditional medium, it was this sort of the skeuomorphic sort of like element to it.
You tend to call that is it trad realism? Is
I
that kind
did
of
at the
like the
time,
phrase?
yeah. So I wrote this
Yeah.
essay. I started writing this essay about trad realism, and I was railing against it. And at the time, because I thought that all the new visual language should come directly from the medium, right? It should grow, and that's like it shouldn't imitate anything in the past. But then in the process of writing, I started to think more deeply about it, and I kind of convinced myself just to have a go. But then in the process of sort of like, sort of starting to build these kind of like rich textures and stuff, I thought, I actually just really love this. This is actually, if you looked at like all the work I do in my house I live in, right? It's all reclaimed materials. It's all like, everything is old and covered in this kind of wear and stuff. So not covered in this wear, but it's like it is worn. Like, so, and then I slowly started to like realize, okay, out the you know, the wear we have on, well, this isn't actually an old cup, but this is a mug I've done a little ceramics as well. But like if we look on the, if we look at the wear pattern on the bottom of this mug, it is random marks, but they're all kind of constrained. They tend to probably have a certain direction because you always pick it up in a certain way. It's like the wear is, it's like an algorithmic process. There's certain constraints to the wear, and the same as if you've got a piece of wood on the beach that's been washed up in the sea. It's not like anything has happened to it. Certain things have happened to it, which gives it this particular quality, and it's algorithmic. It's totally algorithmic. So when we use code to do algorithmic art, and we build these textures, they often will emerge in a way. Well, certainly the way I do it, they appear in a way that actually looks like something you'd see in the real world because it's a very similar process. It's totally authentic to the process. So then I stopped thinking of it in terms of skeuomorphism. I started to think, well, what, we've got certain textures in art that we like. And we don't create all paper smooth, for instance. We like that texture on there because there's something that fundamentally appeals to us, right? So, and those things that we like the texture of canvas and stuff, which we've used over and over again, because we could have found something else with a different texture, but we didn't. We stuck with things like canvas because it yields a certain texture and warmth that we like. Um, when we start to explore encode algorithmic kind of like distress and wear and stuff like, well, I don't really call it that, but the processes I use, you get some of those things appear, and whether and you stick with them because you like them. They're not because they look like something from the past. But there is something really nice about the fact that it does connect to the past. I think, I like that tension between using code, which is this crazy new medium, to create art that actually feels like it's been in the world for a while and kind of reminds us slightly of something, from another time. And I think that's a really sort of interesting tension. Yeah. So so Fontana, to get back to that, was like that. I always liked mechanical drawing. I used to do a lot of mechanical drawing and compass and all stuff. So that was like it's that Fontana just like fell into place. I knew exactly what I wanted after I'd sort of thought about this for a bit. I knew exactly what project I wanted to build, and I built it really quickly. It was like a couple of weeks I had the basis of Fontana up because it actually drew on the geometry I'd been playing with for years. It was actually the core of it was actually came from that geometry, but it had this kind of like, I understood I had an understanding of how to use randomness and Photon's Dream and what long form really meant. And then combined with this kind of like paper, sort of like worn antique kind of look, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And it happened really quickly. And I built it in a couple of weeks. And then I spent like a month just refining the color palette, the color algorithm, because it was a generative color system, which nobody really seemed to do. Not on ArtBlocks. Maybe there may be one. I don't know. But there's nobody really explored that. And it seemed like, well, if everything else is generative, why we just having all these preset color palettes? I know now why, because it's a hard problem to solve. But like it's for the first time I let my family in on the process, and they'd come in and they'd critique me harshly every day, and that was painful. But my daughter especially has got a certain, she's got good sensibility and stuff, and so she helped me realize that people didn't want to put big swathes of purple on their walls generally. She's interested in interior design, and I started to think of it in terms of, okay, what would look good in the house? What would I want to live with? what I want to put on my walls in the old house I built, down the road. So that kind of guided that project, and things really changed with Fontana because that was well received. And all of a sudden, that was mind blowing. I didn't expect that because my expectations were very tempered from the previous experience. So I didn't have high expectations. I loved the project. I was confident in it, but I didn't have, it wasn't like still didn't have a big following on Twitter. I probably had 1,000 followers, and I wasn't getting a lot of feedback. So I was kind of a little cautious. It just, went off really well. I mean, in a way, I couldn't. In terms of the reception, I mean, if I guess if people went on Block Talk back then, they wouldn't know what it was like. But it seemed crazy. The part, the Fontana pie, lasted for 3, 4, 5 weeks. So I think another thing I learned there was it might sound like a lack of, to go and look at the market and see what's sold. You could say, well, that's just a lack of kind of authenticity, right? But I think I think I matured as an artist during that period. I grew up, right? If you're a filmmaker, right, you understand your audience. You can't just make anything because it's just nobody's going to watch it, right? You're gonna so this is balance. It's not one way or the other. You can't just be this kind of a teenager who only wants to do their thing. It's about understanding the market and then it's like another constraint. You can make art within any constraint, but you can be infinitely creative within that constraint. So it's like understanding your market is, the audience is important. So it was important for me back then. Maybe now, maybe it's just 'cause I just maybe know. I have a sort of a collector base now to some degree, so I'm less focused on that. I just doing more what I want to do. But
And also that was released as under the curated, right?
Yeah.
So was that a big shift for you, feeling with the release of Fontana and being kind of considered a curated ArtBlocks artist? Do you feel like that title, being able to be classified as a curated ArtBlocks artist, do you think at the time or now has impacted your sense of either confidence in yourself and in your abilities, or that the different artists or the collector base looks at you in a different way?
Definitely at the time. Yeah, definitely at the time. Not so much now. I mean, it's something I'm still proud of course, and I have, I've recently been talking about how much, I actually appreciate ArtBlocks. At the time, it just opened up a door. It just opened up a lot of opportunities. The market was still hot, and all of a sudden, I had lots of people, and I had opportunities left, right, and center. And of course, I just said yes to everything, which is kind of a mistake in hindsight. But yeah, it just opened up a lot of doors. I mean, I don't have people knocking on my door anymore. It's kind of weird. But it's fine because I'm, I feel solid enough in my practice, and financially I'm okay for a few years, so I can create my own opportunities. Anything, if I approach someone, they wanted to work with me, or if they weren't coming directly, I just got a lot of offers. So I went straight from there to Bright Moments. Yeah, Vellum. And that was, Fontana had gone from 0.4 or whatever, 0.45 to 1254. So that, obviously that I dropped in that climate. I dropped Vellum, which is crazy. Which, I mean, it sold for way too much. but what you can do. I can't. I'm not gonna. But I mean, hopefully, hopefully, if people still believe in it and keep it long enough, they'll be pleased, right? But yeah. So, and that was, that was an amazing experience to have the show in New York and be there and meet the collectors. And I felt like, I took on so many projects in 2023. One of them being Quasi Dragon Studies. But I think a lot of people don't, who didn't really get directly involved in that project, didn't realize how complicated and, what an undertaking that was. But that took a lot of time, it was super stressful because I had to do it to a deadline. But then I did Cove Hive at the same time, I think. The proof piece was just after Vellum. It was literally 2 days later. I did Cove Hive. What else did I do that year? Well, I did Marfa Mesh that year as well, didn't I? And then something else that year. I can't remember.
Was that the same year as work you did that was released with Christie's?
No, it was Sotheby's. I think it was the one-on-one I did with Sotheby's. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm still really fond of that one-on-one. I've only done two one-on-ones. It doesn't really suit my practice, but that one, the Wonderland.
Yeah, that's an amazing piece.
So yeah, it was just that year was a blur, a whirlwind. Like I was choosing to do it, but I think I was starting to become aware of what was driving me to work so hard, and trying to like just be real about what was driving me to try and be, it's at the end of the day, when somebody works obsessively like that, there's something, there's an insecurity or something underneath it, right? It's not usually help coming from a very healthy place. So, so I started to kind of like just reflect on that more and then make a conscious decision to slow down and try to develop a better work-life balance. I've got family, I've got a grandson. I don't want to just totally always be locked here in my studio I mean, like that was doing quasi-drag studies, I think from NFT NYC. Obviously, I wasn't working when I went there, but as soon as I got back home, I was just doing 16-hour days every day for months, not taking a single day off, until we went to Marfa, probably. So, yeah, that is not healthy. That's workaholism. I obviously felt that I had to prove myself. Probably part of that is just having worked, always in the back of my mind. Some of it is having a chip on my shoulder from my 20s where I felt like I was constantly rejected. And some of it is just, feeling like you have to in order for people to value you. I guess it's some kind of lack of self value for who you are, just without having to prove it, without having to do something special. I self reflect. I've been thinking, I do reflect on that a lot now, and I try to take measures to counter it to some degree. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, but so yeah, last summer I took pretty much a few months off and I built the climbing wall, but then I did, I did that freaking ChatFUKR, and that was crazy ambitious as well. It was another one of those things that sucked me in for a few months, and then I was like, dropped it, and I'm like, what the hell have I just done? That was just, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of complexity in that project. I mean, I think a lot of people who collect it still don't. A lot of people don't even realize it's all 100% code based. They think maybe it's just hand drawn or something. I don't know, but
It's like every accessory is its own algorithm, right?
yeah,
It's incredible.
So yeah, and I felt like I came out of that project feeling like I just felt like because that was a self drop in a way. I mean, I dropped on Magic Eden, but they didn't really give us any help. But I hired Alex, who I really enjoyed working with, and she knew the Ordinals space really well, and she managed all my collabs and stuff, and just sort of educated me about Ordinals because it was a foreign world. It's a different world out there. I know the project was a commentary on Degen culture, and I embraced everything Degen about the way I sold it. I did all the collabs. So, I even went into alpha groups and did AMA. Asked me any things and stuff, and but I just came out there feeling a little dirty. I felt like I'd gone too far. I'd almost sold my soul. Just become a complete Degen. It just felt like it was appropriate at the time, but after that, I felt like shit. I'm not going to just go straight into another project from this. I needed to take some time off, so I took a couple of months off in the summer. I mean, I've still tinker around, browse and on algorithms and stuff I was playing with, but not. I consciously tried to stop, and I built a rock climbing gym, which is one of the best things I've ever did. I love it.
Yeah, and I mean, you invited us over, and we
Yeah,
I had a chance to climb in the rock climbing gym that you built
yeah.
in the backyard, and it's amazing, man. It's pretty big. It's pretty big,
It's
and
big
it's
enough.
big enough for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like super impressive. Since ChatFUKR and since building the rock climbing wall, was there any other releases that you had between ChatFUKR and now?
Well, I did Noodlz last year on Shape.
Which is I believe is it the first generative art collection that was released on Shape? Is it the
It's the
first
first.
collection?
Yeah, it's a first generative collection. I think there may be one or two NFTs minute on Shape before. I was ready to pull it. I really was trying to get the first, and I was, I was ready to hit the button to deploy the contract, but I couldn't get I couldn't get a yes or no from the Shape team that they to give me the green light, because they didn't want any favoritism. But I knew like at certain time that I could deploy it, but I just needed to get the green light, because I didn't want to like deploy it before, because I didn't want to like look like I had, an unfair advantage or anything. So it took like 10 minutes before I got the green light, and I hit it. So there may have been a couple of projects before, I don't know, but they definitely weren't code based. They weren't generative. This was the first generative one. I'm always railing about, the first kind of narrative, and there I am trying to be the first on Shape. Who knows, but if Shape grows into something, maybe that'll mean something one day. I just figured, well, the opportunity's there. I had the project ready. I actually found out about Shape 4 days before I, deployed the contract. I just had a project ready, and I was thinking, I don't quite know what I'm going to do with it. I'd even written an essay for it, and then I met Death Beef at Buffalo at the Op Art show, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing something for Shape." I'm like, "What's Shape? What's that?" And then I thought, well, if Death Beef is doing something for Shape, then I need to do something for Shape. So I just reached out to, I can't remember who, probably just a bona fide hand, and he's calling. And then I just had it was a nice project, because I just had one stressful weekend of getting stuff ready, to get it all deployed. Because usually it's like a month of stressful bullshit, but it was just got all one intense weekend, and then there was no promotion, because nobody knew about it, and it was really satisfying just to see it slowly win out, like.
Awesome. And it's a great project. I love that collection.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it has a strange story. Yeah, I mean, it was like, Bob Bob's is one of my top collectors.
Lucas.
Yeah, so he got like 37 Fontanas, and he helped to promote Fontana, back in the day during the run up of Fontana. So, he's always been a good friend. And I said, he just wanted a one-on-one. He asked if I would do a one-on-one for the patrons. I'm sure, but then I thought, well, this is much work for me to do a whole algo. It's the same thing. You might as well have a whole project. So I had a few little starter projects. One of them was the beginner Noodlz, and then there was a few others, and so I sent that over to him. I posted it and kind of promised it to Station 3. But at that time, it probably only had like 2 days work into it. But then, of course, after ChatFUKR and I built my client, I thought I should really get back to work on this and, do this thing I've promised Bob. But then, of course, I ended up spending like 4 months laboring over it. Well, it probably wasn't 4, it's more like 3, but I thought, just give this away. It just seemed like wrong to give it. I just didn't think it would be necessarily fully appreciated. So I said, well, can I just do so that was the origin story to Noodlz. So I had another algorithm which I thought was more suitable. I call it an algorithmic sketch, which again I probably spent a week making, but that was fine for giving away. And then I also gave Station 3 like another 100 Noodlz. We raffled 100 Noodlz, so the patrons seemed really grateful. So I think it was a good compromise. But yeah, you can't just give 4 months you work away.
And especially the way that you work, like 3 or 4 months of work isn't like just an hour or two every day,
Yeah, it's not a small amount. Yeah, so I had to renege my my promise for giving it to him, but nobody complained.
I think the collection was really well received for sure. And then so, man, maybe now we should kind of like dig into your upcoming collection, right? Which is Amplitudes of Canvas. And you made the decision to release it on ArtBlocks. So kind of like let's dig in a little bit, what is Amplitudes of Canvas and why the decision to drop it on ArtBlocks?
Well, I worked on over the winter. I worked on a bunch of things, and then I had a hiatus from sort of like sharing stuff online, and then that's in May I started on Amplitudes of Canvas, and that project sort of like brings together a bunch of different, like none of my projects actually start with like a clear idea I can easily express in words. They start with a clear algorithmic idea, which is like a visual coding idea, but they don't start with necessarily, apart from ChatFUKR maybe, but even that didn't evolve into like this idea of a commentary on Degen culture. But like, so it started off with this sort of clear visual kind of algorithmic idea, but it was like, and it was actually a fork from a really early version of Vellum, and it was like a version that I sort of like dabbled with for a while, which was very distinct from the rest of the series, and I always liked it, but I never really, I always intended to pick it back up, so I picked that back up, and it felt like that early version. It always felt like landscape. It just felt like there's this sense of receding space, and I've always been really interested in trying to find like and sort of like authentically algorithmic approach to landscape. Like Cove Hive was a similar kind of thing. Although, you look at it, you don't necessarily think landscape, but you've got this kind of like, you got this play of scale and space. And those, it just struck me, the name, it just comes from these things that look like they look like they're made from sheets of canvas maybe. And I love this idea that it's kind of like an inversion of traditional landscape painting, where you've got a landscape actually made from canvas rather than a landscape on canvas. So it was just a little, the name just kind of came from that. But I just liked the sound of the name, and then as I started to work on it more and more, obviously, I'm always revisiting this idea I talked about earlier to do with sort of this algorithmic kind of wear and mark making. How in the whole history of in art of painting, of making leaving traces of the actual mark on the canvas, so you've got this tension between the sort of pictorial space and the fact that it's a surface, and then the thick paint or whatever just shows you that, it reminds you you're looking at a surface, and yet you're kind of like, you can also have this simultaneously a sense that this is representing some sort of spatial element. So there's a sort of a tension there. So as I started to develop this project, it became more sort of like gestural, but I wanted the gestures to have that. So when you look at them closely, I mean, not so much on a phone or anything, but if you look at them in print, you would see that they're all made from these sort of like dashed lines. You'd see the trace of the process I used to make everything. Everything is either a dot, basically, or a dashed line in that project, and it's quite clear to see when you see it on a bigger scale. So it's like a nod to the process of making it. Yeah, I could have like made it look more maybe like paint or pencil, but I think it's nicer to have that kind of like sort of like tell the story how you make the marks and so forth. So it's SVG, so it's all vector. It doesn't look like SVG at all. It doesn't look like vector graphics, but it is. And then, so that kind of idea is always in the back of my mind. I mean, I'm just now talking about the things I can actually talk about in words. There's lots of other sort of ideas in the work, but they're visual ideas, They're ideas to do with composition and so forth. And but there are certain things I can talk about and weave this kind of narrative around the project, and people find that interesting. So. And then I think another thing I've like been reflecting on a lot, and actually going back and sort of like researching abstract expressionism, which has always been like my favorite movement in the last century. Although interestingly, like there's not a single sort of abstract expressionist painting that like I would put in my top 20 paintings from the last century, but something about that movement I've always really liked. It's something about the energy of that time, and the personality of the artists, and just what they were trying to do. Really trying to express, let's say, emotion, like deep human emotion through abstract means, which is really difficult. It's really difficult. So I started to think more and more about that, especially as the work became more sort of gestural, and sort of like some of the outputs became kind of like crazy, and quite, to me, and I sort of really lent into that. And as I did with the previous project over the winter, they became quite dark, and they I sort of started to think about this idea that an algorithm is kind of a bit like like a sketch pad from a mad person. Like in the sense that, the algorithm is like long form projects like a sketchbook, and that like they're all sketches in a way because they're not fully crystallized. It's not like a painting where it's just like they're pointing to the bigger story, which is the algorithm as a whole. But each piece is kind of like a sketch, right? And it's like a mad person because a mad person's kind of like, in a way, they're obsessive. They do the same. They go through these loops. They get stuck in loops, and they do the same thing over and over again, but sometimes slightly different, according to their environment and so forth. So it's like this insane sort of like focused loop, which is kind of like what we do. So it's like, and then the work looked sort of like crazy. Some of them, and then I had to start to introduce this sort of like floor element, which is just this simple. I've experienced with it before, but it just gave some of the outputs a feeling like they were like in a room, kind of ward or something, and it felt like I kept coming back to this idea. Some of these outputs, like they're asylums, like there's these crazy expressive kind of forms that look like somehow madness, and I just kept leaning into that and making some of them quite dark. So um, there's like five main types of kind of like movement within the algorithm, and a couple of them are really sort of like more insane, and the other ones are more lighter and kind of like they're not, the expression is not so violent, And I like that, I really want to. I've always wanted to create art that kind of connects on a really sort of deep human emotional level. Now, I don't think I've been particularly successful, but if what I want to do, I mean, it's crazy when you think, here's a guy who wants to make expressive art, and yet he's used a compass and ruler for most of his life and mathematics and whatever. But I still think for me, that's a way to do it. And slowly I'm getting closer, I feel like I think some of the work I did over the winter was some of the most expressive work I've done. But with that project, I couldn't find a way to make a cohesive long form collection. And I still really like long form. I know there's a lot of artists shy away from it nowadays, but I still think it's a really fascinating genre. And it's something that's so new. So there's a lot of things to explore there. And I want to keep I kind of feel committed to long form. Hence why I decided in the end, after agonizing and talking to just about everybody in the space, where to drop it on Studio, which, I mean, honestly, a few months ago, well, I was kind of critical of Studio. I didn't like it much, to be honest. Well, it's not that I always liked the original idea. I loved Eric's vision for it. And I loved the idea of having my studio and having people come to my studio rather than a studio full of artists, if you know what I mean. Um, so, but have, talk to Eric and stuff and learning more about his vision. I think, I really get it and I want to support it. And I think that after talking to lots of people, like different platforms and stuff in the space about the project, and some of them were like really up for releasing it, some of them were, but I did overall get this sense that people are a little bit apprehensive about dropping long form now, just because these silly narratives about Gen Up being dead and all this stuff, and just it's hard, it's a difficult market. It's the and I started to think, well, Gen Art needs to be maybe, when you try to when you sell it alongside one-on-ones and when you sell it alongside AI collection, it kind of gets forced into containers, but it doesn't really. It's a different beast, right? It's a different beast. I don't even know if it really fits the blue chip model. It's like, I mean, of course, you can always have your Fidenzas and Ringers, but on the whole, most code-based art, if it's done well, should be big supply and should be quite accessible prices. That's just that's the model that is most authentic to how it works. I know Eric has that kind of like vision, and it just struck me that ArtBlocks is still the only place that are really dedicated to code-based art. I mean, FX Hash, yes, but then they've kind of like they've had to try some other things just for financial reasons, and I find that a little bit distracting. I'm not really interested in the coin model personally. I mean, it's got potential, it's interesting. I mean, Kim done some really cool things with it, but like I I'm not really interested in it personally. So for me, I'm like, I just suddenly sort of like clicked. I should be trying to release my work with the one place that really are putting who I believe are they're here for the long term, and they're really sort of invested in the one thing I really believe in, which is long form generative art. And they're just the people I should be working with. If a bunch of artists really get behind that and help to guide studio into something that's really awesome for us all. Because I mean, it would be so nice just to be able to say, basically, you come to my studio and it feels like, it has to feel like, the artist's place, where they can release whenever they want. And it's all built on top of that amazing infrastructure that's not easy to build. Nobody else has really built it. I mean, Highlight, I've got some nice tools, but still the ArtBlocks way of kind of working and stuff is just really fleshed out and solid, and it's a nice experience to use it. So yeah, I just suddenly thought, well, rather than maybe complain about how studio is unfolding, I should try to champion it and just put my best work there and just try it for a few years and see what happens. I think it could be a really cool thing, because there's a lot of gen artists out there, a lot really good, and they don't know what to do at the moment. They don't know how to drop their work, where to drop it. I think the nice thing about it is, you can put work up there, and for sales to sell it. Probably may take a year to sell it. Who cares? Or you can just put stuff there to archive. But it will be, I think, the way they're going to try and head is, there's be more of a sort of community built around this. And like I was talking to Verse about releasing it there, and I love Verse. I love what they do. I love Verse talks, and I just think they're going to be around for a long time. Jamie's, a great person. Ivan, I love them both. But I just felt like, because of the pressure, they obviously have to keep selling, So the way they're focused is like, they have to just get a throughput of work. And when you put long form gen art with, like I say, 101s and stuff, maybe it's being forced into a container it doesn't really belong to, and it's not the best place for it. And they have to sort of like, it feels like they have to sell stuff out quickly. I prefer the idea where you can put something in a dedicated place where people are going for long form art, and that just takes however long it takes to sell out. If it sells out quickly, that's nice. But if it doesn't, it being there will maybe help the project of ArtBlocks Studio and the kind of continued vision of ArtBlocks, because I have a lot to be grateful for them for. And reflecting again on what they did was amazing. I mean, they created the genre, and I still think the invention of the genre of long form, the random mint, just the whole concept of it is perhaps one of the most exciting things to come out of Web3. Of course, I'm biased.
Hey, I agree, man. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, I haven't looked back since I've decided to, I've got a lot of good feedback from kind of the decision, and I intend to be encouraging other artists to follow suit. I know I've got some really good friends, some really amazing artists who are kind of on the fence. It could be a really exciting chapter.
I mean, I would have supported you with whatever platform, whatever way you wanted to release this project. But for me personally, I was happy to see that you were going to be releasing on ArtBlocks Studio. So
yeah, it feels good to be back.
That's great, man. And that's actually, you're going to be releasing a little bit before Marfa, but
yeah, sort of August. Yeah, it's always nice to drop something near Marfa. So yeah.
Do you have any ideas about like collection size, anything like that,
Yeah,
for this algorithm?
yeah, I like higher supply projects. I think if it as long as the algorithm can justify, so I'm thinking 500 or so. And it also enables, I think my collector base generally, I've reduced over the last I've released a lot of projects with high supply, a lower price. I think, there's a lot of people who can have a piece of my work that way. And they've all sold out. So it's something that's worked for me, and it suits what I do, There's this huge pressure for artists to make smaller and smaller supplies, make these, the ones have this kind of pyramid of kind of like, so you've got your pieces for the for the people who can afford it. But I don't. It just doesn't feel authentic to the way I work. I'd rather spend a long time building something I feel can make this. And I do think this project has like way more variety in it than anything else I've done. Like this is one of the things I'm always trying to push. So in order to really tell the story of the algorithm, I'm thinking high supply, lower price. I just that's just who I am. That's how I work. It just feels the most of it's like actually something that Tyler said actually in his interview on Verse Talks, he's always trying to think about what's best for the work, what really suits the work. And I believe him. I think he's got a lot of integrity. I think this project needs quite a bit. I mean, like the other one I've done, the crucifix with sumo. I couldn't, that would if I did that, that would be less than 100 for sure. It'd be like 80 or something, maybe even 4, because of the algorithm doesn't have that. It's not. I didn't build it in that way to have that sort of like really broad variety. But this, but I think for ArtBlocks felt a lot of pressure to do smaller and smaller collections. The market was, but the things were overpriced. So yeah, I'll just do a fixed price. Pricing is one of the hardest things the artist has to do, don't it? I would love to have some sort of mathematical model that just looked at the market trends and it looks at my past drops and you can see where they fit in terms of being too high or too low, and it kind of maps out a trajectory like based on like a 5% a year increase. Maybe I think it's fair that your work increases over time, but not by a crazy amount. Somebody who has had a 50-year career producing work should charge more than somebody who's just 3 years into their career, like myself, although I've been making, so you just have some sort of, but of course it's difficult because you get these outliers. But coming up with the price is always hard. You can have model mechanics that kind of like try to see what the market wants to pay for something. But usually I think the collectors are a little bit wisened up. The things like Dutch auction, they collectively usually wait. And it just seems like anything other now, I think anything other than just a fair fixed price just feels like maybe you're just trying to extract more than the market can really handle. And you want people to come away feeling like they've got value. So the other thing I'll like I did with Noodlz, I don't quite know how it works at ArtBlocks, but I'm going to try and have a tier. So like my top collectors, say top 100 collectors, will get a better price, first dibs or whatever, some benefit.
Good to know.
You obviously you'll get a good deal. Plus you're in my council of elders, right? So you'll probably get some other bonus. And I tell you another thing I've been thinking about. What I want to do is like, and I may regret this, I don't know, but like, I want to talk to more of my collectors on video call. Maybe nobody will take me up, but I want to like put out an invite. I mean, I guess when people hear this, like if anybody who holds my work can basically, we can chat for half an hour. It could be about anything. It doesn't have to be about my work. It can be about them, But I think it could be a really cool thing to do. I've been trying to talk more just with artists or whatever, just with people. And I think I really enjoy it. Could be about their work, if it's like a collector who's dabbling and wants some advice or whatever, bounce their ideas. I like doing that sort of stuff.
Awesome idea.
There's no strings attached. It's just an opportunity to chat. And to be honest, I like talking to collectors probably more than I do artists on the whole. Oh my God, because some good artist friends, but it's a world that I don't know as much about. It's kind of interesting to find out about other people's lives and how they see everything.
That's kind of interesting. You get that feedback mechanism. It's a good approach to like connect with your collectors, and I think that there will be people that take you up on that offer for sure. Maybe just to talk about themselves, but I think they'll be wanting to learn more about you.
Right. Yeah, it could be fun. It's like, it's like an extension of going to Marfa, right? We both love going to Marfa. We both people who get energized by social stuff, right? So, it's just like an extension of that. I don't think it's like something that like, it depends on your personality as an artist. If you like social stuff and you feel energized by it, if it's not draining, then sure, go for it. But I know a lot of artists aren't like that. Actually, they're quite introverted. We're not.
Yeah. Which is it is an interesting kind of thing about you that I know for sure that you're energized and when you're engaging within the community, when talking with different people, and yet you have this long history of working so much in isolation. So I feel like that's an interesting kind of juxtaposition a little bit of your past of like working in isolation. And even now you come into your studio and you work, very much so, within your own space, really without anybody to talk with. But then at the same time, when I see you at Marfa, it's like you're engaging with everyone and, from early in the morning to late at night,
We
you're
pack
in
it.
your element. So I
Yeah.
love it too.
Maybe if I didn't spend so much time alone, I wouldn't be so up for it. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. It's a paradox. It's kind of like, I like it both. Yeah. The only guy I talk to all the time is this guy down here.
Oh, I didn't even know he's there.
I didn't know he was there. I just, there he is.
Are
Like,
you serious? Oh my God. Is he alive?
yeah, yeah. It's just chilling. Hello.
That's hilarious. You brought the pup to Marfa, I think last year, right? Was it
That
last
was the
year?
first,
Did you?
no, it was 2 years ago. Yeah, we drove just so we could bring him. I mean, I would like to do it every year, but it's just too far to drive. It's crazy. 4 days of driving for that. Yeah.
But man, I actually wanted to ask your take overall, like kind of like your experience with going to Marfa, because I feel like it is such a, valuable community building event that happens annually. And you've gone a few years. How many years have you gone? 3?
Yeah, this will be 4.
And so as an artist, like yeah, and from I guess as a community member as well, like what has your experience been like going to Marfa? And why the hell do you keep going every year if it's such a fucking trek to get out there?
I know. It's just the best thing on the calendar, hands down for me. It's just because it's all there in one spot. It's not, if you go to a city, you've got to find all the events. You just don't bump into people. In Marfa, everybody you can see who's from Web3, right? Just by looking around, and you just bump into people everywhere you go. So you're kind of guaranteed to meet a lot of people. It's easy, you don't have to dash around. You can just chill out. It's outside. One thing I really don't like is going into like a room and it's loud and you have to shout just to have a conversation. I'm not a big, I don't have a big voice. So it's like after, 15 minutes of that, I've lost my voice. So I can't do it. So I like the fact that Martha's all outside and the climate is nice. Yeah, it's great. I think it's a great thing that they've done. I like the fact that you have to go a long way and it's not easy to get to. It's like a natural filter. Yeah, I hope it continues for a long time. It's definitely changed, it's definitely less ArtBlocks people there than there used to be. It's good in one sense, but better than another, because obviously there's only so many beds in Marfa, so you can't like keep increasing the number. And obviously ArtBlocks pays for a lot of it. So unfortunate if they ended up still sort of facilitating it every year, and yet their community kind of gets pushed out to some degree. But it doesn't seem like people don't, anybody who wants to go is still at the point where they're going, I think. Yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of interesting work there last year. There was a lot of little shows and stuff here and there, and I think most of my enduring friendships have been made at Martha. I mean, we met in Toronto, right? But we cemented things at Martha. Yeah, it'd be great if there was another thing like that in the calendar. I think you could have something like that every 6 months, but I don't know what else it could be really.
Maybe at your place.
At my place, yeah. I mean, we did have that vision when we first moved here that we could turn this into some sort of retreat place, have a ceramics retreat for burnt out Web3 people.
That'd be pretty
So
cool.
to give people an idea where we live out in the middle of nowhere in western New York between Rochester and Buffalo, and we live on a nice lake. It's a big lake, and we have some properties on a little cul-de-sac, 3 properties in a row, and there's only 2 other real properties further down the road, and one of them's owned by a friend of mine. So we could have some nice land, and it could be a cool place to kind of hang out for a few days and unwind. And that was when we first moved here. It's kind of that was in the back of our mind before going to NFTs or anything. To some sort of retreat place. I mean, I was thinking more meditation back then, but like it could be something a bit more creative and
I like the idea. People can just bring their tents or something like that and just.
well, we've got quite a lot, there's quite a few bedrooms here. So, and like we weren't wealthy back then. We just bought, the property was just so cheap here. We just scooped it up, and it was back when the property was right at the bottom. And I mean, it's worth a lot more now, but it's cool to be out here, but it's hard to get people to come out. We usually have to go somewhere to meet friends, because it's kind of remote. And it's a cultural kind of desert a little bit out here.
The event that we met at in Toronto, that was what? I think it was like a 3-hour event, something like that. I'm not too sure. And we had to drive out 5 or 6 hours, and we came to Toronto just for that event.
Yeah.
And we had such a great time.
Yeah.
We had such a great time. And that's where, yeah, I met you. And it was after the event was over, we spent like, 2 hours, philosophizing about, everything. And just, it was such a good memory, and good experience, well worth the drive there and back. And so it just shows, I think, that how hungry, I guess, certain people are within the community to have these IRL experiences with other people that are in the community. And I don't feel like we have enough of that. So I think that the challenging part about that is that we do have a relatively small community overall, but it's global. And so maybe Marfa once a year is enough, but I would like to see more IRL things as well. So, and there's things that are happening. I don't know, NFT NYC, there's always stuff that's going on as well, but I don't know. It's just something that I look forward to every single year. And since going to Marfa, it was just like, you feel like you're with your people. I mean, the larger world, for the most part, is just like an unknown community. And then I think also, in a sense, it's a misunderstood community. We're all a bunch of kind of misfits, And yet when you're there, it's like family. I'm really looking forward to it, man. I know that we're gonna be sharing a place together this year, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. I've had the chance to get to know you personally and to know your life story a little bit and your journey, and I find it to be just like a really extraordinary story. I guess moving forward, like what kind of impact do you feel like you'd want to have in this space?
I don't know. I think I kind of feel like most artists feel like they're never as appreciated as they think they should be. We all feel like we could do better. We could get more, wider appreciation. So of course, I would love to have my work, in as many places as possible. It's undeniable. From all the sort of like self-reflection I've done over the last year or so, just from thinking about my work-life balance and my motivation for work. And I think one thing I'm realizing, I won't say I'm totally there, but like when I champion other people, it's good medicine for me. I think some artists, depends on your personality. Some people would do better to champion themselves more, maybe they're very shy, or like in terms of my own personal growth as a human, I think to champion other people is a really good thing, and to maybe help, inspire other people just by helping them with their projects or whatever. So I want to do, actually do more of that. I always thought eventually I may end up, I'll always produce my own work, but I'd like to do more sort of like production work, actually. Like people who really inspire me, like actually I forgot his name, is music producer. There's a couple of music producers. I find their life fascinating because they spent their whole life. Rick Rubin, right? He spent his whole life. He's used his creative energy to bring the best out of other people. And I feel like if I get out of my own, like when I stop just purely focusing on my own project and my own promotion, I can do that to some extent, and I find that really rewarding. I think it helps me just on a human level. So that's it makes me become a more tolerable person to be around. So that's one thing, like a goal I'd like to try and work on. It's not obvious for me because I can get so obsessed with my own stuff, and I can promote my own stuff. I can be a grift if I can grind and grift and hustle. I can do all that stuff, but it's so much easier and better and more fulfilling to do it for other people. I'm not sure I want to collaborate on art projects. I don't know if I can do that, but just basically like more of a, you've got music producers. I always thought eventually we'd end up with roles like that in this space where you have kind of like art producers or sort of like, mentor, like when I learn a bit more about this, and if if I'm still here in a few years and I can say, okay, I've sort of established myself here and I continue to have success and do sort of mentoring for people who are starting to come through, just share the things I've learned. That's like a goal, but I don't know about impact. Just, it's just the same as every other artist, really. I just would like to have recognition for the work I do, but, it's not up. Who knows? It's just so early. I mean, it's fucking cliche, right? But, 2, 3, 4 years is nothing, in the great scheme of things, You think back throughout history, the artists who have been, actually we remember today, nearly always, they're working in a period where they're just totally shunned and just ignored. It just happens all the time, or just, they're just, they're there, but they're just not really shining. They're not, the market's not really interested in them. So, I kind of laugh at a lot of the kind of stuff we hear in the space about, the certainty that people talk about how things are going to be in 5 years, 10 years time is kind of crazy. I might be wrong. Maybe they know something I don't. I don't know.
I hear you for sure, man. Any last any final thoughts or kind of words of advice or anything or perspective that you want to share as we wrap things up here?
I'm cautious about giving advice to us because I still don't feel like, my career is still only a few years old, right? if I'm still doing this, I'm 70 in 20 years time, and I could give advice. But I think the one thing I often come back to is like an artist has to find their own path. They have to find out what works for them. And that includes the things they don't like necessarily. Like if you don't like promoting your projects, then there's 1,000 ways to promote them. You have to find a way that works for you. So there's no cookie cutter. If you're looking at another artist, sometimes you see a tweet and somebody say, "Oh, you should pay, artists, you should pay attention to this particular artist because the way they are." But they're finding that they're creating a path that works for them. Every artist has to do their own thing, and the more you find your own unique path, the more attention people will pay to what you're doing in the long run. They'll notice that you're forging your own furrow, and that's something I always try to remember, not to look at. And funny, is an interesting piece of advice I was given, right, in art school by this teacher. I told you, he said, never look at your contemporaries. And I do look at my contemporaries, and I admire a lot of their work. But I kind of understand what he meant by that. You can get kind of like seduced by what's trending, let's say, by something that's, and you can start to compare yourself to your contemporaries and start to change what you're doing. I mean, I'm saying this having said that I matured as an artist when I paid attention to my audience, but you can't be in either extreme. You got to look at the market, look at your contemporaries, but maybe take it with a pinch of salt. What's going to work for somebody else isn't necessarily going to work for you at all. And you have to be careful about what's trending, And at the end of the day, if you're just following something because it's trending, people can see. One thing I've realized, I think, through this process is that people can see your real motivation. It shows through. It's obvious to everybody around you. If you're grifting, people can see it. It's obvious, and you're not kidding anybody. So I'm learning through this that I've done some things in the past which I feel is a little bit grifty, I feel I've over promoted certain things, but I'm just trying to be more real to like Tyler says, just think about the work and what's best for the work, and maybe help some others along the way. So yeah, and the other thing is just thanks for having me here and having a chat.
Thanks for making the time, man. I really appreciate the support and your availability.
Appreciate it too.
And best of luck with Amplitudes of Canvas.
Thanks.
It's going to be pretty exciting. All right. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and YouTube, and give me a follow on Twitter at longformart. As mentioned, none of this is financial advice. This is for entertainment and information purposes only. More information can be found in the podcast episode description. And thanks so much for listening in. I'll be back soon with another episode.